My pleasure today to welcome Haydn Reiss into the Fifth Direction community for a conversation. Many of you out there might know Haydn's work as a filmmaker, having potentially watched Rumi, Poet of the Heart, or A Thousand Years of Joy about Robert Bly, or perhaps even the work on William Stafford, who's a poet that we all admire in this community. But I got connected to Haydn a few years ago, just after the death of Robert Bly, when I was asked by the Friends of William Stafford to write a piece on their relationship, on the relationship between Robert Bly and William Stafford. And given Haydn had already made a film about this, a wonderful film called A Literary Friendship, I made it my mission to reach out to Haydn and have a conversation. So since then, you've been on my mind. And just thinking about an opportunity to have a conversation with you, and then having seen you revamp all your work and place it in a different kind of vehicle for offering, there you were again. So I thought it was pretty timely to reach out and say hi. So with that long-winded introduction, Haydn, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you so much, Asher.
Yeah, and I always begin by maybe asking you where you're physically located, just so people listening can maybe orientate themselves.
I'm in a small town, Carlsbad, California. It's at the northern corner of San Diego County in California, USA. If I squint, I could see the ocean. It's about a mile away, and that's where I am.
Well, that's a beautiful part of the world. And I guess the other side of that question, Haydn, is what are you doing there? What's alive for you right now? What are you creating? What's in your heart?
Well, in my heart, oh man, those are big questions. I think I'm in my heart. I'm trying to find a new sense of faith, a new sense of confidence, the ability to have more kindness towards others. The last few years, I've been really rattled. Life has thrown me some big curves, and I'm sort of climbing out of that. And yeah.
Yeah, there's I'm sure there's a lot there to unpack, but we appreciate you being here anyway.
Yeah, no, this is a treat. It's always a treat to hopefully be in the community of like-minded beings. And I mean, I feel we're all sharing similar travails and hopefully some similar joys, and
Absolutely. Yeah, that's for sure. Well, let's I'm going to take you back, Haydn. I wanted to ask you really a question about when filmmaking came into your life and when that kind of became the direction, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I was kind of a loose cannon for a number of years, and then I found myself in Los Angeles, and like every third person in LA, you drift into the entertainment business of some kind. And a friend of mine had a feature film set up at Paramount, and he needed a assistant, and I was just rambling, and so he took me in, and he had another film set up called Jacob's Ladder. And so he had two films going to production, and the director for Jacob's Ladder was Adrian Lyne from England. He did Fatal Attraction, 9.5 Weeks. And, he was a big guy at the time, and he came in and he needed an assistant, and he liked me. And he said, why don't you come work for me? And I was allowed to go. And so that's how I got into, say, films, the big time deal. And then I worked on another feature film after that. But then I realized there wasn't really Hollywood material, in the sense of you either become like an agent or somebody who's developing projects. And it was at this time in Los Angeles, where I was living, Bly was in circulation with James Hillman and Michael Mead, the three wise men. And they had just gotten a big write-up in the LA Weekly by Michael Ventura. And it just intrigued me. There was just, I don't know what was in it, but something said, go check it out. So I wound up going to a men's retreat, maybe 250 men or so, up in a Boy Scout camp a few hours from LA. And that was a type of baptism, I mean, I felt very immediately kind of like I belong here. I feel that the emphasis on father-son work, the extreme gifts of, Hillman, Mead, and Bly, especially Robert. I mean, so that's how I got to Bly and that. And then a few years later, I said, I got to get out of LA. I worked on another feature, and said, what could I do? I said, well, the only thing you really are interested in is what what Robert's up to and this men's stuff. And I went up to Robert, and again, I've never made a film. This is back in a primitive day. We're all spoiled today with the gear and equipment and phones, but back then it wasn't as easy as it looks now. And I said, oh, I want to make a documentary. Firstly, I had to get the nerve up to go up to him because, he was at that time very godlike to me, and big and this and that. And I went up to Robert. I said, Robert, I'd like to make a documentary about you and maybe some other poets. Wow, do you have any money? And I said, I got a little money. And he said, how much you have? Like he was really testing me out. And I said, and I didn't know what it was going to cost. So I said, $20,000. I said, okay. And then he got back to me. He said, the only person I would be interested in doing something with is William Stafford. So Stafford was like his older brother, in a sense. We all looked up to Bly, but Bly had Stafford was about 8, 9 years older than him. And I had seen them read together at a men's gathering too, around this time. And they sat side by side and they just traded poems back and forth, and their friendship, the poetry, and like two, great jazz musicians trading riffs. And I distinctly remember, and I was in my, probably my mid-30s. I distinctly remember, if I'm going to become an old guy, I want to be like them. And so then, Robert, I said, okay, we'll do it about you and Bill Stafford. And that's how I started.
Wow, that's amazing. So the literary friendship came first. That documentary that was the first thing out of that kind of relationship.
Yeah, and Robert gave it the title. I could still see, I went to show him like a rough cut of it. And I had some other kind of crazy, I think my working title for it was Robert Bly and William Stafford, A Story That Could Be True, which is the name of a Stafford poem, right? And I don't know, and Robert, well, how about a literary friendship? Because that was okay with me. But and so over the next, year and a half, did film up in Oregon, where Stafford lives, and then went up to Minneapolis when Stafford was going to visit Robert out there, and shot. And this was, for all you filmmakers out there, which we all are now, every third person is a filmmaker, but nonlinear editing didn't exist. If you follow this, so you would take a VHS tape of your material, and you take a piece, and then you find the next piece you want, and you edit it next to it, and then you go along. But then you'd realize you'd want to put something between it, and you had to start again from the beginning because you just couldn't drop it in. I say that because it's unbelievable that's how it used to be. It was so hands-on like that, and time-consuming and all that. Finished it I was on a deadline to finish it because Bill was turning 80 or 79 and in January, and it was August, and I said, I got to get this done for that event. And we were pretty close when we got a call that Bill had this heart attack and had died, and we were still editing, and I had been staring at his picture for months, and now he was gone, and so there was that. So we still went up. They still had a birthday celebration, only this time it was very moving. The Bly's family there, the Staffords, place was sold out. Theater, and everybody, because Bill was so deeply loved. And so it was at this theater in Portland, and I'm nervous, and I've flown up with my editor, and she's with me. And I've never made anything before. I can't tell you if it's good or not. I mean, all I know. And now I felt the burden of, oh my God, the grieving family, and what I have to offer them. And so I was, I'm an insecure type. I got a lot of Kafka in me. I'm always expecting to be found guilty. And so we're sitting there in the dark in the front row, me and her, and the thing starts, and the screen, up comes this Viking galley ship on the water, the guys. And they're dubbed. It's like one of those old Italian muscle gladiator things. And my mind goes, oh my God, they've put up the wrong film. The grieving family is, and then it turned out that it was the promo for their local film festival. But I never forgot that, because I, for a minute, wanted to jump up and said, I'm sorry, this is not the film. This is not the film. And anyway, it was very, very well received. People were, it went very well. It was a beautiful night. Got a lot of love.
Was Bly there that night?
Oh yeah, Bly and his wife, and Dorothy Stafford, who I became very close with, Kim Stafford, who I'm still friends with, the sisters. And again, Stafford, had been teaching at Lewis and Clark College for decades. He was a much loved, he was a Oregon poet laureate. And he didn't seem like he was just going to leave us that fast. He didn't have a declining health. It just, in fact, there's a poem, and I don't know it, that is the last poem he wrote, which I think it's called "Is That You, Mr. Stafford?" And it's about getting, the poem. He got a call, and it's the wrong Stafford. They're looking for somebody else, and he just builds on that. But it's very interesting to read it in the context of that. It's his last poem, because there is a sense of a finality to what he's trying to say. So that, that's how I got going.
Wow, there's so much in there. I'm almost unsure where to go next. I'm thinking that I'd love to know about how your relationship kind of deepened with these people as you worked with them. Like, I'm not sure. It sounds to me like you had kind of a glancing relationship with Robert, and maybe the same with Bill. But then obviously over the course of doing the movie with them, doing the film with them, everything would have changed. The depth of the relationship and the trust. And I'd just love you to talk about that kind of part of the journey, about getting to know these characters and becoming, almost into the inner sanctum, I guess.
At the time, I did not feel as savvy and confident as I may seem now. I felt like I was over my head, that I had been led into the party without getting my, my driver's license. I was very sincere. And also, I'm not, I'm going after something that's not a lot of people were interested in following, so I had that going for me. I worked with some good, my little team. I got, production people were good. And I always had good instincts, I guess. But, those are people with very big brains. And so, if I would say to a young filmmaker, when you go in, there's somebody or something that you're drawn to, you want to do something about them. So that passion will carry you a certain way. Ideally, though, you have some sense of direction, what within the person you'd like to find out about. You want to find out about their relationship with their father, or how they, kept writing when whatever it is. And I was just happy to be in their presence. But I didn't really feel like I didn't feel like an equal. I wasn't, and again, I had nothing behind me to point to, right? Now, by the time I got to the last film with Robert, I at least knew the mechanics of it. But still, the hope is to try to get something special. And I always say, if you pick a good cast, you know? If you look at my films, I say, look who's in them. I mean, I had Robert Bly and William Stafford. You know, I'm halfway home. You know, like, I could screw it up, but I'm starting with pretty good ingredients.
Yeah, yeah, oh, it certainly does. You know, and I'm kind of thinking about, you know, Bly for all his gruffness. Like he had this, you know, so many people talk about his ability to kind of give people a platform to express themselves creatively and let what's inside them, you know, truly come out. And it feels to me, as a young unknown filmmaker with nothing backing you, that he just said, you know, here's your chance.
Absolutely. In fact, I mean, I made it on a shoestring. I don't know where we got the, you know, I do know where we got the money. We not much, and I was coming up short in post production, and I don't know if I asked Robert or he just offered. And you know, Robert was making money at those days, Iron John and all that, and he sent me a check, and that was very sweet. And I tell you, for the next 2 or 3 years after that, when he would come through the Bay Area to do readings, whatever, and I'd always go to see him. I mean, his live act, I mean, forget, you know, it's like the greatest rock and roll you can go see is see Robert live when he was in his heyday and with musicians. And he always came over to me and gave me a special hug or acknowledgement because he loved William so much. And he, you know, he was, you know, he had just finished doing a book of Stafford's selected poems. So putting them together, making them come together for the purposes of the film turned out to be a gift to Robert, you know, because he got to spend time with him. And he always
Well,
appreciated that.
yeah, and particularly as, you know, William's death came at
Yeah.
that moment, it just seems incredibly profound.
It really was. I mean, I could still see the editing room when I got the call, and I turned to Yvette, who was the editor, and I said, "You're not gonna believe it. Bill died." What? Again, we've been for months hustling to get this thing done, and I'm saying this. This sounds almost contrived, but I swear it isn't. Within a couple of days, in my change, I'm not a mystical guy anymore, but I'll say this: in my change, there was a buffalo nickel. Now, you know what a buffalo nickel is there in Australia?
You describe it for us.
Well, before we have Thomas Jefferson, the president, on our nickels, but before 1936 was a profile of a Native American man, and he was, you know, he was taken from an actual portrait of a guy, and back had a buffalo, and it was referred to as buffalo nickel. Very beautiful coin, but haven't been in circulation since the, you know, the late 30s. And it's how one got into common, you know, but Bill had a little native blood in him. And so I just took it as, again, you know, when you want to believe, you're looking for a connection. So I thought it was just a little sign. But again, these are little things that stand out, you know, that I remember.
Yeah, I'm tying it all the way back to, you know, Bly first asking you about, you know, how much money have you got to back this, and there's almost like a connection all the way through to receiving that coin. There's like a through line.
Yeah, that's good. And you know, a lot of us who like the arts, I mean, and I was definitely guilty of this, didn't want to think about the monetary side of things. You know, give it to somebody else. But no, that's being disrespectful to part of you know, part of the requirements and this. And you know, why should Bly say yes to a guy who's got, you know, $15 in his pocket? I mean, you know, he needed to set a barrier high enough to see if you're, you know, you got to get tested a little bit, right?
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. And you know, I'm also thinking about that night of the first screening there. And you know, when I listen to Bly's voice, like in the times after Bill died, like you can just see how much it impacted his life. You know, there's it's actually quite disarming to listen to him speaking about Bill when he was on stage shortly afterwards. And I'm wondering, like, could you feel that sort of viscerally in the room with Robert and others that night?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's, I can't remember if it's in the film, but it was definitely in the interviews where Robert says that Robert was a younger brother. He had an older brother. And Bill was an older brother and had a younger brother. And Robert's brother died in 1970. He stayed on the farm, but so he had that loss. And but my point is that Robert, who everybody looked up to, saw in Bill the older father, or older brother, though probably there's some father in there because Robert had such a troubled relationship with his own father. But Bill embodied a type of, calm generosity, patience. And, they didn't seem like they would be best of friends because, Robert was flamboyant and big. And, Stafford was kind of quiet and, low key. But they, that was part of what made them, so interesting, right? But they had this great affection and overlap.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is in the film where Bly says something, and I'm paraphrasing. If he says something like, he says, Bill whispers at those who are awake, and I yell at those who are asleep, or something similar, which I absolutely loved, and that's all you needed to say about the difference between them. It said everything.
Yeah, and it's funny, from a literary friendship, at some point, I mean, I had seen Coleman Barks give readings. We all learned about Rumi through the men's work because Robert was sharing his own translations, but also, Coleman's. And I'm going to attempt my Coleman Barks imitation. At one point, a few years later, he said, Haydn, why don't you do a film about Rumi? And, he's from Georgia. And I said, well, maybe. And that's how I got onto. So Coleman sort of gave me the blessings to proceed. He had maybe just done the big Bill Moyers interview, which sort of put him on the map. Rumi, now that film is 25 years old, and Rumi was just starting to take off in terms of widespread awareness. And the Bill Moyers interview with Coleman certainly did that, helped that go. But I really think Rumi, A Poet of the Heart, which had 2 or 3 runs on PBS, which is our public broadcasting system here, just caught that wave. And so one thing led to the other, and that was about 3 or 4 years later. And as we were speaking earlier, I was in a serious relationship and not knowing how to proceed. And I started the Rumi film and quickly found out that there were a whole lot of different people who claimed that they knew really what Rumi was all about. There was a lot of competition within that whole Sufi mystical world of who's got the true understanding, who's got the true teaching. And I talked to a handful of people and I said, oh my God, this isn't what I thought I was getting into, because I didn't want to get into some, theological hair splitting. And I probably worked on the film for about a year, and then I paused it because I couldn't resolve, like, what do you do? Because again, there's no surprise, competition within. I once said to Coleman, I said, the Persians claim Rumi because he was in what was then Greater Persia, and the Turkish people claim him because he was in Konya all those years. And Coleman said, yeah, well, everybody's going to claim a genius. And then it was leading up to my decision about getting married, which I went through with. And then in the midst of that, I said, the one thing I know about Rumi, forget what everybody else knows, that Rumi seems to be asserting this sense of a presence of love, inextinguishable presence of love. And I said, maybe that's what the film should hover around. Yeah. And so I used that as sort of my guide, rather than going into all the sidebars that were possible with that.
Yeah, that's strong. That's strong. I can really feel that. there's that moment in the film when Coleman recites Rumi and he says, whatever was said to the rose to make it, open was said to me in the center of my chest. And there's this idea of, to me, that it's just such a wonderfully deep kind of expression to understand love. I don't know how that hit you when you heard him say that in when you were talking to him, but wow, it really hit me in the center of the chest.
Mm-hmm. That was a long time ago for me. I'd have to, it's hard to remember our younger selves clearly, right?
Mm.
But I know that was how I felt then, and like we were speaking before, I had a pretty long marriage, but it ended. Should I have been reading more Rumi to her?
Mm.
So
Have I loved you well enough today? Is
yeah,
the expression that comes to mind.
yeah. Well, that's the famous one that everybody knows. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to even say the word each other. And wrongdoing and right, that's us, right? We're wrong sometimes or right sometimes, but it's all put into this place where it's all included. So yeah, that was a good one. That was a lot of pleasure in the making of that.
Where does that? I'm just trying to fit it in kind of chronologically. So did the Stafford film, the one that stands alone, Every War Has Two Losers, did that come about?
Come after they came after Rumi.
Okay. Oh, okay. So you kind of returned
Yeah.
to the original ground, if you will.
Yeah, that came about because that was in 2008, I think. The Iraq War was going pretty strong. And of course, Stafford, as a lot of people know, was a conscientious objector. Second World War. Wrote a beautiful book called Down in My Heart about his time in the camps. Um, and I don't know, at the time, it just seemed very troubling. The whole way the Iraq War got underway. And my kids were very young at the time. And so I think I was thinking about them. And I started to read. There's a book called Every War Has Two Losers, which is his son Kim took clips from his diaries, from Bill's diaries, just pulled lines from the diaries and put them all together in one book. And they all center around what is the right thing to do, when is this called for, and when is it not. And I don't know, it just felt like I wanted to do something. I wanted to try something, and I wanted to try to do something a little more ambitious in terms of the production. I don't think I was really that successful, to be honest, but I made an effort. Again, I was working right before the explosion in the ability to have special effects and to have affordable special effects, and all the bells and whistles came a little too late for that film because I wanted bells and whistles. I wanted a little, but there's some, and I did Robert Bly was in the Navy, but he didn't go overseas. And I think it's in the film where he actually says, I think Bill was right. Show me a good war, and but show me is it a good war? That there's a statement, I can't remember it by heart, but Bill says, if it's the right thing to do to fight, I'll fight. But first, what is the right thing to do? So there's something there.
Yeah, no, I loved all those connecting pieces there, and you can see the evolution. Now I understand that more of the chronology. You can see the evolution. So I think that adds a nice piece, at least for me personally, a different lens to kind of see all this through, And then I'm guessing now, just while we're here, sort of talking about the completeness, then there's the Walt Whitman short film you did as well, which is like, was that the most recent?
Yes, that was done. In 2019, Whitman had his 200th anniversary, and I just thought, surely I can, get a few dollars to make something. And so I went to this big foundation that does poetry, and they knew me a bit. And I said, "Hey, I'll make something really sweet, and we could circulate it during the Whitman." So that's how that got done.
Yeah.
Uh,
Mm.
but that came after A Thousand Years of Joy, which was sort of my, that was the culmination of the Bly films, right? And I think really, it's my best work in the sense of I had learned a lot of different things, and it was the challenge of trying to get this big story about this big life in there, get most of it in, and keep it on track. And also because when I started the film, Bly was already in his 80s, and he wasn't on the road. So I know the days of people getting to see him live were over. And for us who were, lucky enough to see him in person, it was great. I mean, he was just a fantastic performer in a sense, right? So, something for those who will not get to see that, but get a taste of him. And my hope, since I've focused on these writers, is always that it'll lead the person to want to get the books, want to do their own reading.
Mm. Well, I'm sure there's plenty of people out there that it's had that impact on, for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
for us too, there's obviously being Australian and growing up in Australia, there's, that's all happening on the other side of the world, So I think to actually bring it into our, looking at the images and seeing the words spoken and having it all wrapped up in a beautiful little gift like that, for us over here on the other side of the planet, there's a certain extra impact that has, I guess.
I think Robert came to Australia several times to see John Stokes, who was a tracker. I don't know anything about that, but I knew that.
Yeah, well, I know John's work, and in fact, interestingly enough, that was introduced to me via the Minnesota Men's Conference. So I learned a little bit about
Good.
about a man from my own
Yeah.
soil, but via that channel. So that was kind of interesting to kind of loop back on itself in a way. But also, Robert, he spoke a lot about Australian Indigenous culture. So he's obviously reasonably well versed, and I imagine most of that would have come through John, potentially.
Yeah, I guess particularly in anything mythological, because he was friends with Campbell and Joseph Campbell, and he was one of his who went to Harvard with him was a poet named Donald Hall, who had a big career as a poet afterwards. But Donald Hall said when they met as freshmen at Harvard, they said, everybody here is bright, but Robert is really bright. He really, he did have a very sharp brain, very large capacity, and very curious. And
So did you have any, I'm looping all the way back now,
yeah,
if that's okay. Did you, prior to that first weekend away with the men, with Hillman and Mead, did you have any kind of, I guess, soulful leanings or poetic understanding, or were you into anything, or was it did you just go into that completely raw?
I grew up in New York City. Yeah, and I hate saying it, but I would have to say that I was a hippie. I mean, I look at, well, you had the hair down to here. You'd walk on those city pavements barefoot, much to the unhappiness of my parents, who just thought that, oh, it's so dirty and whatever. And I did some of those, those hippie things. And one of the hippie things of the day was mysticism. And New York at the time, in the 60s and 70s, I'm thinking probably was when all this for me, all these gurus were coming from India through New York. Muktananda, Satchidananda, I mean, you know, and they'd do talks, and we used to go, and it was wonderful. You know, like, so, you know, I just would, I don't know if that connects to your question, but poetry, I didn't really hear poetry until really with the men's work and Robert. But I think I was primed for some sort of salvation, because my early life was kind of, you know, all over the place, and at times directionless, and I lost my father very young, and you know, so probably the father-son dynamic that the men's work and Robert, I mean, again, Robert, the first weekend I went to was all men, right? And I went to a number of those. So the father-son thing, you know, is huge. And so yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm feeling that. You know, it sounds to me like you came back from that weekend and everything changed.
I remember, I don't know if it was at one of those weekends. So what would happen, it'd be a break, right? The men would do their thing on stage, it'd be a little break, you'd go outside. And of course, wherever Robert went, or Hillman or Michael, but where Robert went, a little, you know, we'd all kind of gather around, just try to listen. You don't need to, you know, that kind of thing. And I remember getting to Robert once, and I was just feeling so much, you know, love in the air from all the men and the back and forth. And I said, Robert, I said, you know, a lot of us look to you like a father figure. And he said, oh, that's good. You know, I could deal with it. It was something along those lines, but he said, that's good. I got it. Go ahead. Meaning he was willing to take on, I don't know, I hate talk like projection. It wasn't projection, but he was representing a positive image of the older man that we all think we're headed towards, but we're very unsure if we're going to get there. You know, I mean, his thing about blessing, young men need to be blessed by the older men. And that's what was going on there.
Mm.
And, you know, it saddens me a bit because I don't know what's going on for the young men today. You know, just may there be things going on like that. I just don't know. I have an 18-year-old boy. And yeah.
Has he shown any interest in, because I know you still sort of show up at the Minnesota Men's Conference from time to time, and you're still kind of there. Is he?
He's not in that kind of headspace, and
No, no,
yeah, no, he's
somewhere
so,
else
you know,
right now.
somewhere else, and you can't force. I mean, because it won't work.
Mm.
You have to attract, and he and I are going out of town next week for a few days, going up into the mountains, and you know, I'm gonna tone myself down and hope that just the setting and the this and that will just open something up between us. You know, that's my hope.
Mm.
Can't demand.
Perhaps a symbol, perhaps a buffalo nickel might arise somewhere out there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Mm. You know, I
yeah.
like that idea. Yeah,
Yeah.
and you know, Haydn, while we're here, I kind of I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about how you've kind of created this library of your work more
Mm.
recently, which you know feels to me like um, a kind of passion play, but also giving people an easier way to kind of
Mhm.
access the material. So you know, talk to me about how that idea came, and I imagine that's been a body of work to get that done.
Yeah, I mean, I just didn't want my films to be orphans, and people, you know, would say who knew about them, hey, where can I see this? Right? Well, they're not up in YouTube because, I mean, going back 20 years, when, you know, people would buy a DVD, right? And then they think they'd be generous because they want to share it, and then they would upload it to YouTube, and the little filmmaker wasn't going to get a nickel. And they didn't understand that you're giving away somebody else's work. So I dealt with that for many years. I mean, the Rumi film has been viewed. It's not up now because finally YouTube helped the little guys. And, you know, if it's copyrighted, you could get it taken down, and people will say, why don't you want to just give it away? I say, well, because the electric company doesn't want to just give away electricity. I mean, it's making a living. It's an honorable thing. Anyway, all this to say, I wanted them to live somewhere. And they're on Vimeo, though if you asked me, and it wasn't prepared, but I think in a search bar in Vimeo, on poetry, I believe, might take you to the page, because on poetry films, and that's where the 4 major films and the Walt Whitman piece are, and they cost a few bucks to stream them and you get 72 hours, and it's a labor of love. I just don't know the exact, but on poetry films at Vimeo, maybe I could get that to you and you could post it
Well,
somewhere.
we'll put a link up here underneath this video, and it already, as I said, that those links already exist,
Oh, good.
certainly within our platform on the Fifth
Yeah.
Direction. But to get it out more broadly, yeah, we'll put some links around the place.
Yeah, it's all meant to be food.
Yeah.
I mean, seeing it on a small screen, it's better than nothing. If you could see it on a big screen, obviously, the days of screenings was nice, and film festivals when you could bring a lot of people into a room and do a screening and get that collective feeling. But listen, they still work. I could say that. I looked at them and yeah, they hold up.
Oh, I think they absolutely do. Like I know many people who hold those films in very high regard, and in the context of food, let me just say, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to sit at your table and to taste of the food which you prepared so lovingly. It's a beautiful thing.
Those are kind words. Thank you.
Mm, mm. Well, look, maybe that's a nice place to leave it, but it's been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to the next conversation.
Thank you, Asher.
Yeah, and potentially inviting you in to do something with our community in a live setting.
Okay, love it, love it, love it.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you. Cheers.